You're listening to Miss Style, Strength, and Grace with Deidra Murphy. This is your one-stop shop for style, fashion, health, and fitness. Deidra's passion is to help empower women to reach their fullest potential, both inside and out. Deidra and her guests will be discussing how to develop your style, health, and lifestyle hacks to energize your day and inspire you to keep reaching higher levels of success. Deidra is a professional fashion stylist, health guru, and Mrs. Washington 2017. It's time to get open and honest with Deidra.
Hello, everyone. Today I am answering a question I get asked all the time. Why did I quit teaching? As most of you know, I'm a retired school teacher. Yep, at the ripe old age of 26, I retired from the classroom and hung up my proverbial red pen, so to speak. However, I bet you money that you don't know the true, although unbelievable story of why I ultimately decided to leave the classroom. This story is guaranteed to make your jaw drop. But before I tell you the story of why I decided to leave the classroom, I wanted to share a little bit of my background of how and why I got into the world of education. So when I was in college, I was switching majors. I thought I wanted to start out as political science, and I had this dream that I was going to go to law school right after and just be this powerful, attorney. And as I got further into college, I realized that wasn't the life that I wanted to envision for myself anymore. And so I started thinking of different majors that I could get into that would allow me to have some freedom as well as start a family one day. And I looked back to my years growing up, and I always loved school. My mom was the PTA president growing up, and although she wasn't a teacher, she became a paraeducator, to those of you that know that term. And so it's kind of that teacher's aide. So she was always in schools and around in the classroom, and I always admired her so much for doing that. And I also saw a little bit of the freedom that it allowed her during the summer times, as she was able to go on trips with us and having, holidays and weekends off. And I thought, why not go that route, especially because I knew I loved children and interacting with kids. So long story short, I became an elementary education major. See, there's that teacher in me. I even corrected myself from saying a to an elementary school teacher. Anyway, I went through college, got my education degree. I student taught in a third grade classroom in Spokane, Washington. The school was called Evergreen Elementary, and it was a low-income school, a Title I classified school. And I came out of college as this naive college grad, wearing the rose-tinted glasses, thinking that I could change everything that's wrong in the world of education and schools, and thinking that this one person could be the change for everything. And I learned quickly on into my career that I was just a cog in the wheel of the machine. Anyway, I came back home to my hometown, and I ended up getting a job in a fifth grade classroom. That wasn't my ideal grade that I wanted to teach, but it was a continuing contracted teaching job. So I accepted the position. They were a little bit older than what I ideally would have wanted to teach, but I accepted the job. That first year was definitely the hardest year looking back. And I know everyone always says that, like, oh, the first year teaching is always the hardest. It gets easier after that. It does, but it still almost felt like another new year teaching when I went down. The second year, I went down to second grade. And that was a much better fit for me and my personality. I'm kind of a quirky weirdo. And at second grade, the kids still want to have hugs, and they still like you, and they still like school, but they can still tie their own shoes. And they're a little bit more independent as far as they can hold a pencil in between two fingers, and they can write their name. So there is a little bit more that can happen in the classroom interactively. Moving on into my third year of teaching, I was also coaching a high school cheer team. At the time, I was also Miss Columbia Basin, a local title holder for the Miss America organization. And I was engaged to Chris, who is now my husband. And I had this particular student, and he was such a sweetheart. For anonymity purposes, let's call him Jake. So Jake was in my classroom, and like I said, sweetest boy, very quiet, but I think a lot of that came down to his, inability to really make connections and make friends in our classroom, which stemmed from his attendance. So he maybe attended school 1 or 2 days a week. And at first I just thought, okay, maybe this kid has a lot of issues with his health and he's sick a lot. And as I started to look through his file, I realized that this had been going on for a number of years. Ever since his kindergarten year, he averaged only 1 to 2 days a week attending school. He had a younger sibling that was in the kindergarten classroom down the hall. And after speaking with that teacher, I found out that it was the same situation with this student as well. So it seemed like a recurring family issue. And a little backstory on the school that I was a contracted teacher at, it was a low-income school. I think we had about 80 to 85% of kids on free and reduced lunch programs. And if you're not in the teaching world and you don't know the lingo, that basically means that's how many kids are, below the poverty line. They use free and reduced lunch programs to kind of gauge where the income level is at for students and their families. And as I, spoke with the kindergarten teacher of the brother, I found out, the brother also hadn't been coming to class, same kind of, scheduling as far as he would only be in class 1 or 2 days a week. And it turns out that even these children had an older sister that was in high school, and she was actually in the classroom of a really good family friend of ours. And after speaking with the really good family friend, I also found out same situation with the sister. And because of this prolonged attendance issue, the sister, who was supposed to be a sophomore in high school going into her junior year, only had about a 3rd grade reading level. And it was the same situation with the siblings. The little boy, I think I called him Jacob earlier, so let's stick with that. He only had a kindergarten reading level, and I was expected to get him up and ready for 3rd grade by the end of the year. As one can see, that would be a difficult situation when a student's only coming to class 1 or 2 days a week consistently. There would be weeks where he would just not come at all. And then obviously I would send home, papers that were missed as far as information that was coming up in the classroom, my newsletters. I would send home reading lists and try to get homework back from them, but nothing ever came back. And so I was constantly just trying to play catch up with this student to at least get him up to speed a little bit in our classroom. And as you can imagine, it was just really difficult. I couldn't make anything happen for this kid. And how was I supposed to make him ready for the 3rd grade when I couldn't legally hold him back a year? At least in the school district that I taught in, if the parents wanted to go ahead and move their student forward into the next year, there was nothing that I could do as a teacher to keep that student, again, as much as I would have recommended holding that student back 1 more year. If the parent really wanted to push the issue, the kid could go on to the next classroom, grade level. And anyway, the naive, I'm going to be the change in the world person inside me felt like I'm going to put a stop to this. I cannot keep seeing this happen and see this poor child get pushed on to the next grade, not ready, and honestly not being even able to read and not being prepared for the next school year, and then ultimately end up in high school like his sister with a 3rd grade reading level. And I would always try to contact the mom and the dad of this family and encourage them to bring their kids to school. And even if, they had a little bit of a cold or a bug, to still try and bring them in, or at least get their homework in advance so that they could work on it at home. But it was clear that it wasn't really an issue of health. They, for some reason, just did not value school and education at all. And that's honestly why they never came to class. And I remember one day early on in the school year, I went outside to escort my students to the buses and to parent pickups after school. And this mom actually came to pick up her son after class. And I figured, yes, finally I can meet her face to face and talk to her, since she won't answer my phone calls. And I was trying to just really be positive and encourage her to bring her kids to school, because I could see how it was already starting to affect her child in the classroom, though it was only, a month or 2 into the school year. And she got out of her vehicle approached me and got within my personal space bubble and started yelling at me in front of, not only the other children, but even other teachers. Thankfully, our school's librarian was standing right by, and she kind of came in and like intervened and got between the mother and myself and told the mom, like, hey, if you have an issue, you need to speak with this teacher with respect. And if you have something that you need to talk about, we can talk about it with our principal and have like a legit meeting. And this mom wouldn't have any of that. She just wanted to yell at me outside and tell me that I had no idea what it's like to be a parent, which obviously I don't. And I didn't at the time, especially, but as a teacher, I knew what was best for the children when it came to their education. And this continued all year long. And as much as I tried, I was getting our school counselor involved in the situation, and we were filing court orders against the family because it was a violation of the Becca bill, which I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it has to do with attendance issues, and you can get fined as a parent if you're not bringing your child to school. And, I hated going that route, but I felt like there was nothing else I could do. My hands were tied, and that was the only thing I could accomplish to help encourage this family to bring their students to school, was if the legal system got involved and started giving them fines. Now, obviously CPS, a lot of people always ask me like, well, how come CPS or, those kind of agencies didn't get involved? Honestly, there's bigger fish to fry for those agencies. There's kids that are coming to school that literally are getting beaten or around drugs or are not getting fed, and there's true neglect in that regard. So those situations take higher priority than a student that is, missing class 5 days a week, 4 or 5 days a week. And it was just, obviously this mom had something out for me because I kept trying to get like the legal system to slap her on the wrist, but nothing ever changed. And it was the springtime of this last year that I was actually teaching. And, in the midst of all this, I'm also trying to plan a wedding and get that lined up and make sure that I'm in, shape for, slimming down for the gown as far as my wedding date goes. And I obviously like to work out and everything else like that. So it was just part of my lifestyle. And one day after school, I went to the gym just like normal. And I was done with my workout. I went back into the ladies' locker room to gather my things and get changed. And lo and behold, in the locker room of my gym, where you have to have, a membership, you pay a membership to be a member of this gym, there was this mom. And with her was her teenage daughter. So the teenage daughter was probably about 15 or 16, old enough to know what's right and wrong as far as life goes. But they are, how can I say this? Very big ladies. The daughter already at, 16 years old was bigger than me. And obviously the mom probably had at least 150 pounds on top of me as well. And I saw the mom and the daughter in there, and I just ignored them. And I'm putting my things into my bag. I have my bag set on the bench right behind me that's in the aisles of the locker room. And the mom starts throwing shade at me and worse than just shade, started saying really heinous, outrageous things at me in the locker room. And at first it was kind of under the breath, and I looked her up in the face and I said, "Excuse me?" And she just said, I don't know you. I'm not saying anything." I said, "Okay." And I went back to gathering my items, and she kept doing this. So finally I looked at her and I said, "Look, I know you don't like me. If you have something to say, you can say it to my face." And she went with, "I'm not saying anything. I don't know you." And I said, "Okay." So I went back again to gathering my things, and I turned around and was putting my items into my gym bag. And from behind me, my hair got yanked back, and the mom and the daughter start wailing on me. I don't know how else to describe it. I think there was one other person in the locker room, and she was tinier than me. So obviously she didn't want to get involved and get herself injured, which I don't blame her for that. And she ended up running out to try and find an assistant or a manager of the gym itself. And the mom and the daughter start wailing on me. I get knocked to the floor. I ended up, I tried to just cover my head, and what they say, like, cover and protect, because I'm not a fighter. I don't know how to fight. I don't even know how to throw a punch. And finally they get pulled off of me and they get escorted to the front counter. And I tried to kind of gather my wits, and finally, the manager of the female manager of the gym comes in, and she didn't see anything actually happening, and police got called and all that fun stuff. And so the police officer shows up, and I'm trying to describe what happened. And anyway, long story short, I was beaten up in the ladies' locker room of a gym, ended up with a black eye. I had bruises all over me. So I went to the hospital that night just to make sure that there was no broken bones or anything. And obviously everything checked out. I didn't have anything broken, but I was banged up and bruised up. And also too, I wanted to make sure that there was documentation of everything. And I filed the police report, and unfortunately neither one of them got arrested that night, because there was nobody really that saw everything. That one woman that did see some things kind of starting ran out and to try and find help. So there was really no other witness besides myself. And I guess, my battle wounds weren't enough to prove what happened. And I didn't go to work the next day. I called in for a sub. I was, emotionally a wreck, and I couldn't imagine going to work and really serving my classroom the next day. So I got a sub, and I stayed home that day just to kind of collect my wits. Ended up within that first week filing a restraining order against both the mom, the dad, just to be safe, of this family, as well as the teenage daughter. Filed restraining orders against all of them, which that's a whole process in and of itself. Apparently there's even different avenues you have to go down when you're filing a restraining order against a minor. So that was a fun process. And finally, went back to work within a couple days. We ended up switching that student out of my classroom, so that way I would not have to deal with the parents, and they were not allowed to come into my classroom. They were not allowed to come down that hallway where my classroom was. If they wanted to enter the building, they had to talk to our principal and get escorted anywhere. And even at the high school level, so when I referenced our family friend that taught the teenage daughter, their school was put on alert as well, and just made known that, like, if you see this family or this parent, you are to call security. Like, they are not safe. They've already assaulted a teacher at a different school, and they were really quick to make sure that their teachers at the other school not only knew about the situation, but felt safe as well. And all this prompted, a lot of different things in my life. And like I said, there was a lot of court dates that I had to go to just because of serving the restraining order. That's a huge process. And I was having to take, half days off of work just to go and represent myself in court to get the judge to, first I served them with a restraining order. So then there was a court date for that. And then they tried to serve me with a restraining order. It was a really weird situation. And the judge, I remember that day, looked at them and he's like, "What are you doing? This has nothing against her." And he threw it out. It was so silly, but I had to get a half day sub just to go and take care of the matter. And because of all these, days missed, I'm trying to do that while also keeping my classroom in order and making sure my kids were still getting on top of their end of the year testing and being online with their curriculum for the rest of the year. And, I was also trying to plan my wedding. No big deal. Because of all this, I was very busy, kind of pulled in a lot of different directions. And unfortunately, I think this was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, was I did not feel supported. I felt supported by certain colleagues within my school, other teachers that really reached out to me and mentored me and really just tried to make sure that I felt safe. And then I also had teachers that made fun of me, including my own principal. So my own administrator of the school that I taught at apparently was making fun of me to other teachers. So for instance, somebody kind of said something rude to him in a joking manner, and he quipped back with, "Oh, watch out, I'll put a restraining order on you." And that should not come from the administrator, the leader, the principal of the school that I was teaching at. And I just didn't feel, supported or really cared for anymore as a part of that community. And like I said, I had a few other mentors and colleagues within my team, especially my grade level team, that supported me. But overall, it kind of became this source of joking, and it was still such a sensitive topic for me that I just didn't think it was appropriate to be laughing about it at that time. Maybe, a year or two out, sure, that's the time to start joking about it. But when it's right in the moment, it's not the appropriate time to do that. And also looking back too, I remember my fiance at the time was Chris, and he's now my husband. He said to me, "You don't have to deal with this. You don't have to deal with this in order to impact children." And I thought, really? That's true. I don't get paid enough, number one, but the pay it wasn't what I was teaching for, but I didn't get enough appreciation to have to deal with that anymore. So after he said that to me, that's when that whole conversation came up of, what would you be doing if money didn't matter, if you could do anything all day, every day, what would you do? And that was when I decided, hey, I'd love to be around fashion and clothes and styling women and helping show them how to dress. And, he encouraged me to turn that into a business model, which is what led to me now becoming a personal stylist. And as I look back, especially at that particular moment where he said that to me, I am truly grateful for everything that happened. I mean, I would probably still be teaching today if it wasn't for that instance, because I did end up putting in my resignation and finished that school year out, got married to my best friend about a month after the school year ended, cleaned out my classroom, took home a bunch of my materials because I do plan on homeschooling my future children one day, or at least being able to educate them from home to a certain extent. And, I wouldn't have started my own business where I value freedom. So I guess that kind of lends me into the next thing I wanted to talk about. When it comes to looking back at my years teaching, there's, some lessons that I walked away with. And like I said, that particular instance of getting beaten up by a parent, like how crazy is that story? And being able to learn, what I was going to deal with and what I was not going to stand for anymore, it became a catalyst for me to start being an entrepreneur. And, there was twists and turns along the way after, quitting my career that ultimately led to my styling business. And it helps me focus on one of the core values that I really appreciate, which is freedom. And as I look back into freedom, like it can mean a lot of different things for a lot of different people, but for me, it means the freedom to set my daily schedule, to live the life I want to live. If, my husband and I strategically plan a vacation or even just a trip, we don't have to be like, okay, well, it has to be around the holiday because I need that time off, or I need to be able to do it during the summertime so I'm not in the school year. Like if we want to travel in the middle of March, I can, or any other time of year. And I really wanted to talk about now the lessons from a teacher that I've learned. First, I'm still a teacher. Although I may not have a big giant whiteboard behind me anymore, I get to go out in the community, and now I teach adults, usually women, whether it's in a group or one-on-one with a styling client, how to dress with intention and develop that personal style and confidence. And for some reason, my adult students tend to listen more attentively than the 7-year-olds did for some reason. Secondly, I've also learned to be true to myself. I thought for years that I could live with stifling my own creativity, being confined to a box. You must be on this page of the curriculum by this date. You have to give the kids this standardized test. But ultimately, that stifling of my creativity left me unhappy. I didn't have an outlet for my creativity as much, but also that for the kids. I tried to incorporate freedom when and where I could, especially how I taught. There was a lot of times where I would, break into song and dance just to get a lesson or a point across to my kids. But I still felt confined by both political and curriculum red tape. Not only when it came to the classroom, as far as like being true to myself, but also, like I mentioned a minute ago, being true to my core values. I value freedom and individuality, and I felt like the way that we were teaching kids really stifled that, especially as Common Core state standards were about to be fully implemented into the classroom. I just couldn't be on board with how confining those rules are, and it made me feel, really constricted. Looking back as well, being a part of the teachers union also made me feel really confined because I felt like I had to agree with whatever the teachers union was supporting, especially when my union dues were automatically taken out every month, regardless. And now I get to impact not only adults, but I can volunteer with children in a unique way. And I have the freedom that being in a typical classroom didn't afford me. Now, for instance, when I go to the women's shelter and I read to the children there, I can read any book I want, and it doesn't have to be on a certain page by a certain date, and I can be my silly, quirky self and really engage and get to know the kids. I also have learned to value flexibility. If you've ever done a pageant, you probably know the pageant motto, flexible and gracious. That was never more true than when I was in the classroom. I remember the first year when I taught 5th grade, I was in the middle of a math lesson and I had a test scheduled right after, and the school fire alarm went off. At first, I thought it was just a drill, like, oh, they're trying to test us on how fast we can get the kids outside in a certain manner. But as I led the students outside, I realized there was a pipe that had burst in the classroom right across from us, and the room was starting to flood. Luckily, they didn't have to, evacuate the whole building later. They were able to stop the flow of water. But by the time we made it back inside, I got the kids all calmed down. I really only had about 20 minutes left of actual instructional time. I think we had PE and then, other things scheduled later in the day. And so I didn't really have much time left to get that lesson in and to test my kids on another subject. So I had to instantly switch up the rest of my lesson plans and wrangle the kids back into learning mode after such a disruption. So talk about being able to go with the flow, not just the pipe water flow. And, it's just really taught me that that's a life lesson for all instances in life. Sometimes things go exactly as planned and sometimes they don't. Even though best laid plans go awry. And this has been the biggest helper in my day-to-day life. Sometimes you got to just learn to be flexible and go with it. Especially as a entrepreneur and business owner, you've got to learn to just go with the flow sometimes. Lastly, I learned how far praise can go and how it goes so much farther than punishment. That old saying, you gather or you attract more bees with honey than vinegar. Well, it's true for any person in any situation, whether it's children, employees, family, friends, so on. Rather than, punishing quote unquote bad or undesired behavior, focusing a lot more on praising the positive actions gets more of that positive action. For some reason, my husband tends to unload the dishwasher a lot more when I take a minute to truly thank him for doing it, rather than getting upset when the dishes are still piled in the sink. So that's, something I need to focus on too more is praising and getting more of that truly thankful, not just words, but even actions. Maybe it's taking a second to pause and give my husband a hug and a kiss and say, thank you for unloading the dishwasher, baby. So as we wrap up today, what are some past jobs or careers taught you about life? I encourage you to think about some of the different roles that you've had in the world, and whether or not you've liked this role, think about how it's molded and shaped you into the person that you are today. As always, I love you all, and thanks for listening.
Hey ladies, thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoyed today's episode. To help empower more women, please be a doll and rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast. For show notes and other free resources we mentioned today, go to stylebydeidra.com.